at the office of Representative Danny Morgan. Danny, you have some concerns that we were talking about just off of camera.
You're right, Daniel. One of the problems that we're experiencing at the Capitol right now is we're 21 legislative days away from leaving this building, and we yet don't still have our budget completed. I believe they're just now beginning to start budget talks. This is one of the latest in-session times that I've ever seen us not have a budget prepared, and there's major ramifications because of that.
Well, and as a citizen, that kind of surprises me in the sense of early in the session. I thought that we had some, I guess, conversations in the back rooms of the Capitol to have the budget moving forward. At the end of March, I noticed that the governor had said that he had put forth almost $750 million worth of maybe revenue sources or new revenue sources. I don't understand really, why does it take so long to put together the budget?
Well, originally when the governor has his State of the State address and he addresses a joint session of the House and Senate, he prepares a budget. The Constitution of Oklahoma requires the governor of the state of Oklahoma each beginning session to present a balanced budget. And so the governor, instead of making the drastic cuts that you've seen not only in the 2010 budget, but probably will come in the 2011 budget, he said, here are ways that we can increase the revenue sources so that we can patch a lot of those holes. And so that's when the negotiating began. The House and Senate leadership said, no, we're not interested in that at all. We believe that just continuing to make the cuts is the way we need to do this. And so that's where a lot of the difficulty comes, is when the Chief Executive Office has his budget on the table, but yet the House and Senate leadership hasn't submitted theirs back to the governor. They just then start to shoot holes in the governor's budget and say, what's wrong with it? I'm waiting to hear something positive out of the leadership of the House and Senate to say, hey, here's where we're headed. This is what we're going to do. They're still corresponding back and forth with agency directors trying to figure out what the impact of the cuts are going to be. If we don't know that by now, then somebody's not doing a very good job.
Well, and of course, our government has three heads: the judicial head, the executive head, and the legislative head. The judicial head doesn't really work with the budget at all. It's the executive and the legislative head. And what you're saying is the governor, which is the executive, has a budget on the table, but the legislature does not.
That's correct, and they're not very supportive of the governor's budget. I mean, in theory, the legislative body could just say, we like what the governor presented, we'll just pass his budget and go to the House. That didn't happen, and it normally doesn't happen. I mean, it doesn't matter who's in control of the House or Senate or the governor's office. There's always that give and take between the governor's budget and the House and Senate leadership's budget that they put forth. The problem we're running into is our public education institutions, Common Ed particularly, are beginning to have to RIF teachers because they do not know how much money they're going to have to work with next year. They've been told some rough figures. Well, we think there may be as much as a 10% cut coming to you, but we just don't know yet. And so that's very difficult for those superintendents and principals trying to look at their staffing and go, you know, teacher, I can't guarantee I can keep you next year till I see how much money, because by law, the schools can't spend more money than they're given. And so they're very hesitant to renew a lot of these teachers' contracts right now until they know for sure how much money they've got. Well,
and that kind of sounds familiar to me over the last couple of years, learning a little bit and going through the process, talking with you guys, is it seems that the people or the part of our government that needs to know their budget months in advance is education. Does it affect any other portion or any other entities as well?
Certainly, it will also affect Department of Public Safety and how many troopers they have to furlough or potentially RIF. You're looking at the Department of Corrections when we talk about corrections officers guarding our prisoners. We look at Department of Human Services and the number of child welfare or aging welfare cases that are presented before them. I mean, all agency heads have to look and say, we don't know what manpower we're going to have, and so they're going to start either doing RIFing or at least some furloughs to say we're not going to be able to pay you except 4 days out of the week for 2 weeks, or I mean, they'll have to figure out how to manage it. But the point is they're willing to do the management. They just got to know how much money that they have to work with so they know which way to turn and which way to go. And so that's what's frustrating as a policymaker sitting in the position I'm at when my constituency calls and says, where are we at, what's going on? And I have to say, you know, the budget negotiations are privately going behind closed doors between 2 or 3 people. Obviously, I'm trying to talk to those individuals to say, here's what my constituency base is saying about the budget. But April 1st, was the deadline for the legislature. And I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that April 1st there's a state law that says the legislature has to fund education by April the 1st. And when we talk about education, that's higher ed, common ed, and career tech, because 53% of every cent spent out of our dollar is spent on education. So 53% of all of the money spent in Oklahoma go to education, either common, career tech, or higher education. And so not only is common ed, but that's the one we always think of because they're closest to the citizens, and that's, the teachers live in our communities, and we go to church with them, and they're in our Sunday school classes. And so they're the ones that I hear from most. But now the state employees are beginning to also communicate with me and say, my boss can't tell me whether I'm going to be furloughed or whether I'm going to have a job. And so it's difficult.
Well, something that strikes a chord there with me, just listening, is you say that these decisions really are being handled by 2 or 3 people. That's of a concern to somebody like me when we're talking about the entire state. When it's the entire legislature, which is a body that incorporates close to or over 200 people, I don't understand that. Talk a little bit, if you would. Tell me, who are these people that are making these huge decisions, so few people, and I might have an idea about how to help that out. Right. So talk to us about that.
Well, first and foremost, it's the Appropriations Chairman in the House and Senate. That's Ken Miller over on the House and Senator Johnson from Kingfisher over on the Senate side. And then the governor will probably usually have Scott Meacham, the state treasurer, and also a strong confidant of the governor. He will be his negotiator that goes to the table. But really, those 3 individuals are the ones who basically say this is what we're going to do. Now, this week we have been having subcommittee meetings on appropriations of the different agencies, but more than anything else, it's just asking the agencies, okay, how much do you think if you were to be cut 5%, 8%, 10%, what's that do to your budget? What would you do if we asked you to do that? These should have been questions that were asked in February when we first got here, because we knew this situation was coming, and to delay it till 20 days left of session to make some decisions, that's just I think a bad way to run a railroad.
Well, so it sounds to me, and correct me please if I'm wrong, but just as somebody who's learning as we go, it sounds like there's a committee chairman in the House and a committee chairman in the Senate, and for congruency, almost a committee chairman in the governor's office. And when the governor gives his address, that chairman in the government's office already has to have had a suggestion. The law states by April 1st it's supposed to be funded, so why not have the committee chairmans on each side of the legislature mandated to have a presentation on that day or some sort of address themselves of how it's going to play out or what their suggestions are?
Another great constituent idea just came from the host of the show. And I think that's a great idea. It's too late this year to obviously do that, but if I'm reelected in this cycle and come back, I would certainly like to see some type of proposal that says that the chairman of both committees, the House and Senate together, have to submit a budget early, and then we'll start negotiating from there. But to wait this late in the legislative session, I look at business and industry, and if they tried to run a budget this way, it would be an absolute disaster for their company. And I get a little frustrated sometimes when I think, these people deserve answers. The citizens of Oklahoma need to know what our priorities are, and the way they know that is where we spend our money.
Well, I would suggest that we make it a media event. We invite people, we let everybody know, just like the State of the State address to begin. Maybe this is where we're at on the budget address or something that happens just before April. But man, if you can get that done, I'll just smile and shake your hand. That sounds like something that could help all of Oklahoma.
I appreciate that. And again, it's important we hear from our constituency base, those that are affected by the cuts, those that are affected by revenue enhancements. I mean, the people of Oklahoma need to say, it's time. Get your work done and come home.
Well, and no suggestion is a bad suggestion. If you have an idea, that's what you guys work on.
That's exactly what we work from, and a lot of the legislation that you'll see, in fact, a lot of times when a bill comes before the floor of the House, a lot of our members will say, who asked you to run this bill? Where did this idea come from? Because it helps us understand who's pushing it. Is it some lobbying group somewhere, or is it a constituent of yours who's legitimately had a concern with the government services they received or some type of punishment they received? In other words, where did it come from? And why did they decide this was an issue?
And let's get more of those answers to be it came from us, the people that you guys represent. Representative Morgan, thank you very much, as always, for speaking with us.
Always a pleasure, Daniel. Thank you.